meeting, but I'm Mary Ann Bernstein. I don't know how we say this. I'm now the immediate past president or the immediate past president. Either one of those I'll answer to. And I had chaired the Leadership and Development Committee, which is what Sally actually runs and is the generator of this orientation program. So today we're going to go through a process of reviewing board norms, volunteer code of conduct, and then fiduciary duties. And a lot of this has seemed really dry, but there's a lot in here that's really important because it really deals with trust, respect, open communication, and what the expectations are for your roles on the board. And at any point, please stop me if you have any questions. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's go through the board norms first, and these were adopted by the board in June of 2018. The first issues deal with respect, and it's a simple common sense statement that the norms are that we treat each other with respect during all discussions and deliberations, and sometimes things can get rather intense because we're dealing with some really important financial issues as well as governance and just meeting the goals of FASEB as the missions of the Federation. But through all of this, it's really important that we respect each other's opinion and each other's voices in the discussions, because the board is strong, because we bring diversity to the board, and therefore often, or at times, or maybe rarely, someone will disagree with you, and we just need to be respectful of those differences. So the reason we have these norms is that we seek to build the reputation and credibility of FASEB, and of course its member societies, and support FASEB's goals of diversity and inclusion. And we remain strongly committed to those goals, despite some of the current opinions to the contrary. We want to be open and supportive of new members as they join the board. So part of that being supportive is the outreach that we're doing right now, so that you can come in having a clear idea of exactly what's expected of you and your colleagues on the board. One thing that's really important is the next one, which is preparation. It's really critical for you to be as engaged as you can in the deliberations of the board, and the best way to do that is to prepare in advance for any board meeting. Sometimes you'll get rather substantial packages, but all the information that's in there is really critical for us to make the best decisions for the Federation. So it's important that you read all the information and think about it before you come to the board meeting, so that you're able to provide thoughtful commentary and points that will help us get to the right decision for the Federation. So there's just more language like that as we go along. Expand individual and collective awareness of all the needs and opinions of FASEB member organizations. So we've probably already discussed a little bit, I missed the last meeting, but this kind of schizophrenic existence that you may have as a representative of your society, but also a board member. And as a board member, your obligation is to put often your board hat on. It's important to bring the perspective of your society, the needs of your society, the wants of your society. But in the end, your obligation is to the board. And Sally will get to that a little bit more later in this presentation. I've already said at the beginning, the next point, that we want to be sure that everybody gives open and fair consideration of the varying viewpoints of the board members and among member organizations. So it's important to, one, exercise independent judgment, freely express any opinion you have, even if you haven't heard anybody else say it. Your value as a board member is to bring what you think is important to the board. So don't be shy. Nobody else on the board will be. We really value your participation. We want to really hear your opinions, because that's what makes us stronger. I know so much of this is common sense, but just to state it up front, I think is really helpful. Certainly helped me when I went on the board. So it's also important that everybody has a chance to express their opinions and views without interruption, and that it's also important that the conversation not be dominated by just a few members of the board. So as you're on the board, you'll know there's different ways of raising your hand, either in Zoom or flipping up your placard when you're in person. If you have something that you want to say, raise your hand, put up your placard, and be confident that the chair of the board, who's the president, will call on you in time to express your opinions. It's also important to stay focused on the issues, and the chair, now Eric Kelly, the president of FASEB, will remind people that the issues at hand are this. So often we can get distracted from that. We really need to focus on the issues at hand. It's also important that whatever deliberations the board as a body comes to, whatever decision that is, that you represent that decision to the outside world. So even if you do not agree with that decision, if the board has a vote and this is the decision of the board, that's the opinion that you should be voicing to the outside world, because it's important that we all stay uniform in the voice and messaging that the board members are giving out to the outside world. So along with that, of course, is maintaining confidentiality. You will often be hearing, reading sensitive or proprietary information. And if you have any questions about what you can or cannot, what information you can or cannot convey to your member society, because all of you, we hope, will be reporting back to your member society about the deliberations of the board and what we've discussed. But sometimes that discussion detail will be a bit sensitive, or there will be proprietary information. So if you have any question about what you can or cannot convey to your member society, please ask. It's a great question. Any board meeting, can I tell my member society about this? And you won't be alone in asking that question. There'll be other people who also want to know the answers to that question. So always great just to ask before transmitting other information. And the same would be said about executive sessions. So sometimes, and more lately, it's been every time there's been a board meeting, there's been an executive session at the end. And that's when staff, unless they're invited to stay, will leave. And that would include the executive officer of the society. So it's just the board members usually, unless somebody's invited to stay and provide additional information. Whatever goes on in that session is really important to remain confidential, because oftentimes there are sensitive issues regarding maybe staff or financial decisions that may or may not be made. And it's important that that discussion not be leaked, because that generates all kinds of angst. And that's not necessary. What's necessary is to have the discussion open and frankly about something, so that the board can come to a decision as to what is the next best step to take. I know I'm sounding redundant here, but these are really important points, and you can imagine that we have these points because at some point or another in the past, someone has not done this. So it's the same thing when you fly. All the rules and regulations you go through are because somebody broke the rules at some point in time. So that's why we have this written out in such detail. And then something that often doesn't often come up, but is important too. Sometimes people, the press, for example, may contact you and ask you to respond to FASEB's stand on something because they know you're a board member. It's really important that you not act officially or speak or write publicly on behalf of FASEB unless the board has enabled you to do so. And I would say that if you ever have a question like that, someone contacts you, talk to, you can contact Eric Kelly, who's the president. You can contact the executive officer. And if you want, you can also contact Sally, because she is the person who's dealing with governance issues for the board. So any of those folks are fine to ask if you have any question. And then I guess the last thing is that the staff and the executive director play really critical and important roles in this entire process. The Federation would not exist and would not be effective without the incredible staff and executive officers that we have. So please, it's important that we respect their roles, what they're there to do, and that we don't just reach out to anybody and start requesting information from different staff members, that we go through the process of go to Eric Kelly, the president, first, because he is the chair of the board. And then if there's any question beyond that, that can be transmitted to the executive officer, Frank Kraus, and or to Sally. But it's really important that we go through this command structure so that we're not all asking the staff to do things for us without approval, because that will just make a lot of mess of their time and it would really diminish the efficiency of the staff. And that's it for the board members. Any questions about that part so far? It's pretty common sense, I think. And then, like any good board, we go through an evaluation and assessment process. And for the board, it's how effective the board functions as a group. A lot of the questions are about that. You'll get be asked to evaluate how effectively the board employs best practices. And we've already gone through some. Sally's going to go through more in a little bit. And also, importantly for all of us, is your satisfaction with your participation on the board. And then we go through another process of evaluating the executive director, how effectively the CEO achieves and makes progress on the priorities and objectives that have been identified by the board for the executive director. And then there'll also be a processes in place to evaluate surveys, customer satisfaction surveys, financial metrics that the board might set for reviewing programs, products, and services that the board has approved at different board meetings and as part of our continuing mission. So I think that's just like every organization we've all been involved in. There's always reviews and evaluations and communication between the leadership and the particular officers or office that's being evaluated, and the same is true for FASEB. So any questions about any of that? Okay, now on to Sally for volunteer code of conduct.
Great. So I have the job of giving you all the most interesting information here, but it is just like what Marianne talked about with the other things. Some of it is common sense, but it is really, really important to having a functional board. So we have a volunteer code of conduct, and you can find the full code of conduct on our volunteer portal. It's based on a model created by a group called the Society's Consortium to End Sexual Harassment in STEM. This is a group that FASEB is a founding member of, and it's run by some lawyers that are really, really good at putting model policies together like this that really make societies really live by their values of inclusion and belonging. So the document, when you look at it, you'll notice that it does speak to aspirational conduct rather than outlining prohibited behavior. So you'll see things like, we value honesty in the conduct and attribution of work rather than don't plagiarize. You'll also see language like, we strive to be inclusive and, be welcoming of all diverse viewpoints and that sort of thing. This just lays out the key provisions of the volunteer code of conduct. In the next few days, probably next week, I will actually be sending to all volunteers an annual acknowledgement and disclosure that you will need to go to an online form and fill out that just attests that you've read, understood, and agree to abide by the code of conduct. You'll notice that there is an Article 5. It says procedure for dealing with non-financial conflicts of interest. That is specifically, well, not specifically, but it comes up a lot if we're talking about awards or things of that nature. But Financial conflicts of interest we'll talk about a little bit later in this session, and there is a separate policy that we have to deal with fiduciaries for financial conflicts of interest. Okay, are there any questions about the volunteer code of conduct? Okay, great. Then we will move on to the fiduciary duties. So, okay. So as we mentioned in session 1, the board members are different from other FASEB volunteers because they are fiduciaries for FASEB. The term fiduciary comes from the Latin term for faith or trust, and a fiduciary responsibility speaks to the relationship between one party who is obligated to act in the best interest of another party. So in our case, that refers to the responsibility you as a board member hold to act in the best interest of FASEB. Nonprofit board directors are legally bound. So this is all nonprofits, not just FASEB. Any organization that has gotten a nonprofit designation by the federal government, their directors are legally bound by the fiduciary responsibilities. And this is because the government recognizes that we need to have assurances that nonprofit organizations and all those involved with them aren't profiting from the organization's efforts. And so when Frank described in our last session, you know, that we're nonprofit, but that doesn't mean no profit. The nonprofit status really means that no one individual or entity is profiting off of the work of that organization. And then when that does happen, you have to pay taxes. And so you no longer have that status. So the 3 fiduciary duties, and we're going to go through all of these today, are the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. And I will just say too, this has come up in a board assessment in the past. I did not make these up. These are in the common law of the United States jurisprudence. This is what we all abide by, and these are not Sally's rules. These are real legal rules. Okay, so just as a reminder, board members are responsible for FASEB's overall welfare, and you are stewards of FASEB's assets. And so you'll probably see this slide one more time in this onboarding, but it just is meant to demonstrate what this stewardship entails and to stress that these are really important. These are important to FASEB existing and flourishing. The 3 fiduciary duties define what is legally required to ensure that FASEB is well managed and financially sound. Okay, so we're going to look at each duty individually. So the first duty is the duty of care. As you can see from this slide, the duty of care requires active engagement and making informed decisions. Informed decisions are only possible if you prepare for meetings by reviewing the agenda and background materials, and also be engaged in the discussion. And we try to get board agendas sent out for our monthly ones. We try to get those sent out the Thursday before the Tuesday meeting. For our longer, either in-person meeting or multi-day virtual meetings, we try to get those materials sent out 2 weeks in advance. It really, really is critical that you review those materials ahead of time. And I would also encourage you, if you have any questions, we list the contact information of the person who's in charge of each agenda item. Please be in touch with them and ask those questions. It makes the whole process work a lot better, and it is also what you are legally required to do. Okay, are there any questions about the duty of care? Okay, next is the duty of loyalty. So this one, I will just admit, is the one that's really tricky for FASEB. And this is that the duty of loyalty requires you as a director to give undivided allegiance to FASEB without regard to personal interests, business interests, or the interests of any other region or organization. So that includes your home society. It is a breach of the duty of loyalty for a director to use inside information gained in the performance of his or her responsibilities for personal benefit or to benefit his region, business, or any other organization. Board members must act in FASEB's best interest. And again, FASEB's best interest, not the interest of the society that appointed you to the board. And this is tricky, and we will talk about this in more detail in our third session. This is something that we always struggle with, and there was a slide in session 1 where we talked about you're a representative of, but a fiduciary. You're a representative of your society, but you're a fiduciary for FASEB. So this duty of loyalty does not mean that we don't care what is happening at your society or how a decision that FASEB makes will impact your society. Those things are absolutely critical to the discussions and the decision making by the board of directors. But when it comes time to make a final vote, the vote has to be in what you think is FASEB's best interest. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, I can't see if people are raising their hands because of how I'm showing on the screen.
We're okay.
I'll ask Mary Ann to.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so this is where we get into conflicts of interest. And so FASEB does have a very specific conflict of interest policy that is really meant for fiduciaries of the organization. So board members, our finance committee members, and audit committee members. So the duty of loyalty requires that we're always cognizant of conflicts of interest. The duty of loyalty requires that board members give their undivided allegiance to FASEB without regard to their personal interests. We just went over this, or any other organization. It's a and again, I'm seeing some repetition here, so I apologize. And so the conflict of interest policy is meant to outline how we deal with potential conflicts and how to recognize them. And board members are required to sign the conflict of interest acknowledgement and disclosure form every year, just like our volunteer code of conduct. But unlike the volunteer code of conduct, which is something FASEB does as a best practice, when FASEB is audited every year, they do look to see these signed conflict of interest disclosures from every fiduciary. So we will do that for all new board members, probably in the next week or so, and then you will see the conflict of interest disclosure again in January for 2026. Okay, I see Mary Ann has her hand raised.
Yeah, I did because Judy put something in the chat and I thought this was the time to deal with it.
Okay.
So she said, Judy, do you want to say it yourself so we can all hear your voice?
Sorry. Yes. Trying to unmute. I mean, I'm assuming, right, generally it's going to be what's good for FASEB is good for home societies. I guess, you know, if you're comfortable, is there a case in which this has come up? I think just serving as a committee member, generally that's been true. I guess, you know, I just can't sort of envision the case where a conflict arises. And maybe that's just something, if we believe that, we just come to you and deal with it on a case by case.
Yeah, I think so. The conflict of interest policy is actually, so it's a little different than just like the overall duty of loyalty, if that makes sense. So where we see the duty of loyalty really comes up more, that's like, if we just say the duty of loyalty broadly, that's where we're more dealing with, this may be in the best interest of FASEB, but my society isn't happy about it, but I need to do, you know, that sort of thing. I used to have discussion questions and examples in this presentation, and this has not, or it will not happen, I believe. But my hypothetical situation was, let's say FASEB did a survey of what membership dues should be, and what the survey comes back is, it says we should be charging every society $1 million a year. That may be in FASEB's best interest, but that is very much not in the interest of our member societies. So that is a very wild hypothetical, but that kind of situation we were thinking about that tension. So it would be, you're not going to see that situation, but something along those lines. I think the financial conflict of interest is more along the lines of, and I used to have another hypothetical situation. Let's say you serve on the board of a publishing company that you're compensated for or something. And then FASEB is actually talking about signing a contract or maybe leaving a contract with that publisher. That would be a financial conflict of interest that we would need to disclose. The board would need to discuss how they would like to proceed. And then we do have to acknowledge that information in our meeting minutes. And if you all remember at our meeting last week, I did say, I think some people get into this habit of abstaining if they don't know if they want to vote to approve or oppose. But abstention is really meant to record who is not voting on that issue. So that's why I'm saying, like, you can abstain from a vote, but I have to record who's there, because oftentimes if there was a conflict of interest disclosed, we want to record in our minutes that that person did not take part in that vote. So does that answer your question? Okay. I see Mary Ann's hand again.
Yeah, I just thought this might be an opportunity based on some of the financial considerations that we've been going through recently, and you're going to, as new board members, you're jumping into the deep end of the pool with very little information, unless you've sought that information from your predecessor. And even then, it's good to get a broader perspective. So there will be times when your society may think that FASEB should do X, that would be in the best interest of your society. But the financial decisions that you're going to be facing and making as a director for FASEB, those decisions and votes that you make should be with a clear dedication to doing and voting what's best for FASEB. And there have been a few instances where there could be a perception that what's best for FASEB is not what your society would want. And that's where this financial or whatever conflict of interest can kind of make that decision making murky. And I think maybe one way to deal with it is during the discussions at the board meeting, say, I'm having a little bit of difficulty because I know my society would want this, but I think the thing that's in the best interest of FASEB is that. And just say it. And that way there can be other people weighing in, and that will help you come to an understanding of what decision might actually be the best for FASEB. Does that help a little bit, Judy? Because you will be seeing some of this on the board. In the current environment.
You know, yes, at points it would be, hey, if my society's not supportive, that might have these consequences, which FASEB can then decide will proceed or not, right? But it's both can be true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. They can be. But when you vote, your vote should be for what's best for FASEB, even if you're voting against what's best for your society. So it's not even just, I think part of it is seeing the conflict, but you still are required to act in making a financial decision that is best for FASEB. And that's a tough place to be sometimes.
Yeah. But I think I'll just add a couple points to go back to my hypothetical situation where, let's say FASEB is like on the table, $1 million dues per society. That makes sense for FASEB. Like, FASEB is all of a sudden going to generate all this revenue. But that's when board members are going to say, my society is going to leave the federation if that's what's happening. Then it's not all of a sudden in FASEB's best interest anymore. And that is where, you know, that sort of feedback is really critical. And the other thing that I would say to that, like, that hypothetical is wild for a lot of reasons. But one of the biggest ones, and we will talk about this in more detail next week as well, we do not bring things to the board that should be surprising. Frank and everyone else on the team is very, very good at making sure that we're getting constituent feedback and stakeholder input throughout the entire process. So you've been on the Science Policy Committee before, like, you know that like that's informed by the Friday Public Affairs staff meeting, which has representatives from the member societies. It may have gone to the Animals in Research Subcommittee or the Training and Career Workforce. I don't know, unless it's been kind of an emergency, like we have to deal with it right now, the world's closing tomorrow because of a pandemic situation, that we have not gone through multiple groups at FASEB, be it our Executive Officers Advisory Committee, the SPC, Public Affairs staff groups, whatever, to get a lot of feedback and input before we're actually making a decision. And so I hope that that helps with some of it. And I think board members can also say, and they have this last year, said we need more information as well before we make a decision. Okay. Moving on to the duty of obedience. So the duty of obedience basically means that we're going to follow the law, and we're also going to follow the policies and procedures and bylaws that FASEB has developed. And I'm going to ask Frank to speak on this highlighted part in just a minute. But it's not just the duty of obedience, but for all of the fiduciary duties, you are collectively and individually liable if the duties are not practiced while you're carrying out your board work. So it's very rare. I don't see it happening. And I'll turn over for Frank real quick can you mention the directors and officers insurance?
Yeah, so so we don't intend for this to freak anyone out about this this liability here. Basically, you need to do your best job at acting as a director on the FASEB board, executing these duties as Sally has just described them. And if you do that, then if something goes awry, we have directors and officers insurance that covers us as individuals and collectively as an organization. However, if you're consciously acting against these duties, right? If you're doing something that is in clear violation, then the law has determined that you can be found personally responsible because you're not acting in the best interest of the organization, right? So as long as you're doing your best, what would be considered, you know, a normal and regular effort to fulfill your duties, nothing to worry about. This is really meant to address bad actors on a board, people that are actively looking to cause a problem, if you will. So then the insurance, basically the insurance company is going to say, we're not covering you because of A, B, or C. This is extremely rare. I've never heard it enacted.
No. Yeah. I think there have been some instances with like really big organizations like the Red Cross or the NRA or something where
Yes.
these sorts of things have been threatened, but I actually don't know of any nonprofit cases where they actually went through. I'm sure they exist because, again, as Marianne said, all these things exist because somebody did the bad thing. But it is just to be aware that it is a possibility if you are not abiding by the fiduciary responsibility. Thank you, Frank. So these is the hierarchy of our governing documents. So of course you have to follow the law. And then these are the internal documents that if something were to go awry, a lawyer would say, okay, were you following FASEB's bylaws? Was this in line with your committee charter and practices, that sort of thing? And as long as they were, your duty of obedience for FASEB has been followed. And again, I will apologize for the word obedience. Somebody on an assessment a couple years ago really, really hated that word. Again, I did not make it up, but it is what is here. So while you are a board member, you will have times where you need to approve policies, processes, and charters. In this year, I anticipate that there will be bylaw amendments that you have to approve. And the bylaws also lay out like what needs to happen to approve bylaw amendments. And all these things work in concert to ensure FASEB is achieving our goals and objectives set out in our strategic plan. So when you look at a committee charter or a specific policy, if there's something glaring that you're like, I don't think this is serving FASEB's mission, that's a point when it is your duty of care to speak up and say that. But I think we strive really hard for everything to work together in a framework to ensure that we are abiding by our duty of obedience. Okay. So if you go to the webpage where we talk about our board norms, you will also see this statement. This is also when you're at an actual board meeting, we have these placements with the strategic plan on them, and the other side they have the board norms and duties. And this, just tries to put in a sentence or two how the board duties work when we're actually in a meeting. And so this means we support FASEB's mission and purpose. We abide by FASEB's bylaws and policies. We prepare for, attend, and participate in board meetings and related activities. We ensure that the financial business and business affairs of FASEB are managed in a responsible manner. And we act in good faith and best interests of FASEB and its membership. Okay. And now we have time for questions. So let me know if you have any thoughts or questions about this information. I used to have discussion questions and hypotheticals in here, but we were trying to keep things succinct. So we are actually a little ahead of time. So there's plenty of time for questions right now. Okay.
I have a question. This was a very excellent presentation. I'm sorry I came in a little late. I just wanted to comment that I think the discussion about conflict of interest with the societies was a very important one, because we're all members of one or more FASEB societies, and we're on the FASEB board. So that kind of conflict is going to be present for all of us. In addition, some of us may also have some of the other types, a personal relationship with a company that FASEB may be dealing with or whatever. Those will come up on occasional situations. But the potential conflict between our member societies that we're members of and FASEB is ever present for all of us. So I appreciated that conversation and just wanted to highlight its importance.
Yeah, I might just add that in my experience in different organizations, conflict is a conflict when it's not identified.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you bring it up, it can be managed. And so if there's ever a concern, voice it, and then there'll be a solution to that. Just kind of keep that in mind too. If you're ever concerned about it, bring it up. I feel like there might be a conflict. So can we talk about this for a second?
And Sally mentioned this earlier, but sticking with this theme because it is an important one. And we used to have a slide that illustrated this, but we want openness, absolutely want openness in discussion of every topic. And you should, if there's a specific perspective of your society, you absolutely should be bringing that up from that perspective, right? So that all of the information can be shared with the board. It's as Sally said, when it comes time for a vote, for a decision, that's when you need to make sure you've got the FASEB hat on. And when you're voting, you're considering FASEB overall, but you're considering all of that input, right? Other society representatives, right? Your colleagues, that have shared information about their society's perspective, right? You're taking all of that into account in making a decision. And then I will want to reinforce with Sally that there's nothing that goes to the board that hasn't already had discussion and input from at least one other group, right, to provide input. We meet monthly with the executive officers. There's emails that go on in between. As far as that goes, we are critically dependent upon the work of the Science Policy Committee to do the work of FASEB. I think we're going to get into that a little bit about committee work and not redoing that during our next session.
Yes, yes.
Yep, so I'm not going to jump forward to our next session. We're to cover a little bit about roles and responsibilities of the different facets of the organization. But there are a lot of other groups that we're gathering information and input from. I'll give you an example. The Membership Strategy Task Force. You received a very brief update on that during the July board meeting. In that update, we mentioned that we are not going to be looking at potential for some sort of individual member option as part of a future membership strategy. That was directly related to input and feedback from the executive officers not to do that. So that's a good example, I think, of how we engage different elements of the organization to make sure we have the best information to share with the board.
The only thing that I would add to that, and I did mention this as well, is do not be shy about saying, I need more information, or was this group asked? I think that is really critical. Sometimes staff will feel like there should be enough here, but we are grown-ups and we will go back and get more feedback, because we do recognize how difficult this dual role is. And we want, the board most of the time operates through consensus. Like our board meeting last week, where the vote is mostly unanimous for the most part, that's pretty typical. And we don't, that isn't to say that we want to have issues just for everybody to agree, but we do want people to feel like even if they disagreed, the decision was made, and it was made very thoughtfully and utilizing all these duties that we just discussed. And yes, next week we will be going through this in more detail and talking about the board's relationship with committees and that sort of thing.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
After we voted as a FASEB board director, would FASEB give us guidance, like which matters or which issues that can be shared with our member organizations or societies, that we'll have some guidance, like which ones to share or not?
Yes, and oftentimes, especially at our longer meetings, that will be an agenda item where we say, like, okay, what are we sharing from here, or what can be shared, that sort of thing. Always, as Marianne mentioned, feel free to ask that question. I think it's always a really good one. We'll talk about this again a little bit more in the next session. The rule of thumb in kind of best governance practices is that we don't talk about what happened in the deliberation, but we can freely communicate the decision that was made.
Okay.
And oftentimes, we'll talk about this again, sorry to sound like a broken record, it really falls to FASEB staff to communicate the decisions made. So you saw last week, like if we're writing a letter to Congress or we're approving a response to an RFI or something, staff is in charge of disseminating that information. But for things where it's going to be a more detailed situation, or a more difficult situation, like some that have happened in the last month or so, we will talk about how that decision will be communicated to FASEB stakeholders.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Roberta. Sorry, I cannot turn on my video. I'm right now in southern Italy. I know it's beautiful. I'm home. But if I turn on the video for some reason, then I lose the connection.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yes, so this is might not be related to today, but it's something that sitting in another board, we noticed that was helpful. Will we have as a board a time to discuss some issues without the staff? Is it incorporated in the time, like if we have board meetings and we have 1 hour, could the last 5 minutes, for instance, to be devoted only for board members without staff, so that if there are, I don't know, sometimes as an habit, maybe there are no issues, but maybe there are some things that we would like to discuss among us. So yeah, I was just wondering, we adopted this type of for our society and it works really well. So I was just wondering if this is something that happens during FASEB meetings as well.
So Roberta, that is always at the pleasure of the chair, right? If the board feels it needs to go into executive session, you can kick the staff out at any time you want. That's the chair's prerogative to do that. As a practice, we always schedule what we call executive session, no staff time for the longer board meetings. So the December board meeting, which stretches over a 2-day period, it is virtual, about 4 hours each day. There will be executive session time. For the shorter meetings, we don't pre-schedule that time in the meetings because quite honestly, they move pretty quickly. There's a lot of work that we usually have to get done. However, if an issue comes up, then we will schedule that executive session time. And we just had that example in a special meeting of the board on June 19th when they discussed the executive director transition, which we touched on during our first orientation session, where the executive session took longer than the open session. So it can be done, but that's how we handle it in general.
Okay, thank you.
Cliff?
Yes, Raj had a really important question and point, and Sally, gave a really good answer to it, but I wanted to follow up on that. I think what Sally said, and this is sort of a question and ask for confirmation, but that decisions would be conveyed, but not the discussion leading up to it. And I just wanted to, I think I'm going to or largely overlap with that, but I'm going to make a point, and I hope that it's true, and tell me if it is or not. I don't think that there should ever be individual attribution of, well, Cliff was for this or Cliff was against this, because if that's present in any type of body committee dealing with confidential information, then another great example in the university setting is the promotions committee. How can the faculty and the promotions committee really do their best judgment and express that so that we get a fair decision if they think that somebody's going to tell the person, well, Joe voted against you or something like that. So we can't do our best effort to make the best discussion to arrive at the best decisions if we're fearing that the things that we will say as we try to assess difficult situations will be leaked and attributed individually to others. So I would hope that the policy of this board is that such individual attribution can never be made, can never be leaked to anybody outside of the board itself. Can I get a validation or confirmation or refutation of that?
Correct.
Yeah, you are absolutely correct, and that is absolutely a sentence on one of the slides for next week as well. That the individual attribution is absolutely verboten.
And recognizing that you may be in a situation where you are in a discussion with someone else from your society, as an example, that's asking about something at the board meeting, and simply relaying this was the decision made, right, is hard, right? They're going to want some context, right? You can talk in general if they say, well, did you consider this.
Mhm.
Yes, we actually did, right? But this was the final vote. To Cliff's point, individual attribution is absolutely a no-no. The final decision, what the information you have in the minutes of the meeting, that information can be shared.
And you'll notice our minutes are very succinct, and because like that is so important, and I don't want anybody able to look at those and say, "Oh, I see that there was drama at this board meeting."
I see Mike has joined
Yeah,
us.
so even to extend that, Cliff, and Sally, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't put in numbers of the votes and
Right.
that sort of information. Again, it's really to that kind of extent, which is really, I think, very important for us to be able to protect our confidentiality.
Unless it was requested. There have been
okay,
a couple
Sally,
times in the
thanks.
last year where the board has requested that the vote count be included in the minutes. Now, as I mentioned, most of our votes are very, very, indicate a high degree of consensus, but there have been a couple times in the last year where the board
You're
actually
right.
asked
Yeah.
for the vote count
They
to
can,
be
sure,
reported.
they can, but I think in general,
Yeah,
that's,
yeah.
again, good practice for us.
And I think that was just to indicate in the record that
That there was
some people didn't agree with that.
opinion.
Okay, these are great questions. I think we'll have a good discussion next week as well. Okay, Marianne, do you want to give everybody 7 minutes back?
Yeah, I do. Thank you all very much. Good questions, good discussions, and we'll see you next time.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.